They came without warning, their ships darkened the sun, blotting out the sky we once called ours. At first, we thought they were gods. Then we learned they were harvesters. They tore through the clouds like blades, draining oceans into vapor and forests into ash. The great cities of humankind, once proud and defiant, became hollow bones under alien light. The Vakhtari Dominion didn't conquer, they consumed. They called it reclamation, the cleansing of wasted worlds. We called it annihilation. Every continent screamed as the siphons tore through the crust, pulling the planet's lifeblood into their floating crucibles. Rivers boiled, mountains crumbled, and the air turned thick with the dust of billions. The sky became a furnace, red and unrelenting. Humanity's weapons, kinetic, atomic, digital, meant nothing. Their technology folded hours and moments. We were clever, not divine. And they had no gods left to fear. From the ruins, messages flickered, last transmissions from defense satellites, voices fading in static. The words were the same everywhere: retreat. Survive. Remember. And we tried. Underground bunkers became tombs of echoing fear. The sound of distant engines filled the silence. The young asked if the stars had abandoned us, and the old could not lie, maybe they had. Yet, in the cold dark, whispers began. They weren't about salvation. They were about memory. Before the first city, before steel and fire, we had listened to the earth. The old ways spoke of her breath, the pulse beneath stone, the voice in the wind. We stopped listening long ago. But in the hours before extinction, the forgotten stories found their way back. Some said the earth was dead. Others said she slept. And there were a few who still believed she would wake. The Dominion didn't care. They pierced the mantle, installing a device so vast it eclipsed continents, the core siphon. They fed on the planet's magnetic fields, its heartbeat. When it activated, the crust split open. Lava turned black. The auroras vanished. And for the first time in recorded history, Earth's core went silent. The blue world became gray. When the Vakhtari left their orbiting fleets to harvest what remained, they declared victory. To them, humanity was dust and myth. Our extinction, an afterthought. But they were wrong. Because even ashes remember the flame that made them. In the depths of what was once the Amazon, a handful of survivors gathered around dying lights. They were soldiers, scientists, wanderers, the last sparks of a burned species. Among them was Era Sen, a biologist whose hands had planted forests before the war, whose words had spoken to both data and dirt. When she knelt beside the dead soil, she felt something impossible, a rhythm beneath the silence. It was faint, fragile, yet ancient. Not a heartbeat, not quite. More like the memory of one. Era began to dig. For days, through soot and stone, she clawed at the ground, driven by something she couldn't name. Others joined her, skeptics, broken people with nothing left to lose. Together, they uncovered ruins older than any civilization, carved in spirals and roots of stone. Words etched in forgotten tongues glowed when touched by human skin. Symbols that pulsed, faint but alive. She recognized them from half-lost archives, the sigils of the Terran Circle, an ancient order that once believed the planet itself had a soul. It wasn't science, not as she knew it. It was something older. She understood then what she'd felt, not fantasy, but a presence waiting to be heard. At night, as the world burned quietly above, Era heard the earth whisper. Not in words, but in feeling. Sorrow. Rage. Memory. She realized the Vakhtari hadn't killed the planet, they had only wounded her. The core was still alive, buried beneath a shell of grief. And perhaps, if they could reach it, they could wake her. Others thought her mad. But what else was left? Faith, myth, science, all had failed. Yet this whisper offered something no equation could, hope that wasn't human alone. She led them deeper into the ground, following tremors that felt like direction. Through tunnels that glowed faintly with bioluminescent moss, they reached an enormous cavern. At its center, suspended in darkness, was a faintly glowing crystal veined with molten green light. It pulsed once, then went still. The survivors felt warmth, then cold, then the echo of breath. It was alive. They called it the heart of Gaia. Above, the Dominion began preparing their final extraction, to drain the last remaining essence and leave Earth hollow. They had no idea what they'd missed beneath their feet. Era touched the crystal surface and whispered, "We're still here." The pulse flickered. She smiled for the first time in years. "And so are you." No one could explain how, but the cavern shuddered like a sigh. The moss brightened. The air thickened with scent, ozone and rain. Something was stirring beneath centuries of silence. Something vast. Something angry. The others fell to their knees, half in awe, half in terror. The whispers turned into a hum, deep and steady. It resonated with their bones, with the buried ruins, with the molten rivers miles below. Era closed her eyes, feeling it spread through her blood like warmth after frost. The voice spoke again, this time clear, ancient, and unmistakably human. "I remember you." When she opened her eyes, the green light filled the cavern, and the earth began to move. The cavern erupted in light. The pulse of the heart quickened, each beat shaking dust from the stone like ash from a dying fire. The survivors staggered, shielding their eyes as roots of molten energy spread from the crystal into the ground, weaving a network that glowed beneath their feet. The earth was waking. Era felt the voice inside her mind, neither male nor female, but endless. It spoke in emotion, not language, sorrow, then fury, then the sharp clarity of purpose. Humanity had called Earth their home, but they had never truly heard her. Now she was ready to speak, and the sound of her awakening was thunder. They worked quickly, though none knew exactly what they were building. Era guided them as if remembering a dream. Fragments of ancient rituals mixed with fragments of lost science. Circuits were carved into the cavern walls with metal drawn from the ruins of satellites. Symbols once etched into stone were redrawn with molten silver. The heart responded, each pulse syncing with the rhythm of their hands, as if guiding them toward a single moment of convergence. Outside, storms brewed without clouds. Lightning crawled across the sky, but there was no rain, only static, endless, and rising. The Vaktarii noticed the changes, but they dismissed them as environmental decay. They had no concept of a planet that could fight back. When the network was complete, Era stepped to the center. The others stood in a circle, their faces hollowed by hunger and belief. The heart pulsed brighter, and she felt it calling to her. She understood then what it demanded, an offering, not of blood, but of connection. The price was simple, herself. She smiled faintly. "If you wake, make them remember who we were." Then she placed her hand on the heart. Energy surged through her, tearing through flesh and thought. She saw everything, the first spark of life in ancient seas, the rise and fall of continents, the first laughter of humankind, the silence that followed their ruin. She saw the earth's pain, not as destruction, but as memory, every wound, every scar recorded in soil and stone. The planet was not just alive, it had always been listening. The cavern roared. Roots burst upward, fracturing the crust. Rivers reversed their flow, carrying light instead of water. Mountains began to shift as if stretching after a long sleep. From orbit, the Vaktarii watched in disbelief as continents glowed along tectonic lines, forming a web of green fire across the surface. Era's body dissolved into the light, her consciousness merging with the core. The others fell to the ground as her voice echoed around them, no longer human, but vast, layered, resonant with the sound of wind, flame, and tide. "You took her breath," it said. "Now she inhales." The first retaliation began without a weapon. The atmosphere thickened, turning electric. Storms formed instantly, spinning with unnatural precision. The Vaktarii command ships fired plasma beams into the clouds, but the beams scattered, redirected by magnetic currents shifting at impossible speed. Bolts of lightning returned the favor, spearing their hulls with pinpoint accuracy. On the ground, forests exploded into growth. Trees that had been dust a day before now towered like skyscrapers, roots tearing through metal and concrete. Vines spread across entire cities, reclaiming steel and glass in minutes. The air filled with oxygen, dense and sharp. Every breath felt alive. Then came the oceans. Tsunamis didn't rise from tectonic pressure, they rose by will. Water moved against gravity, climbing into the air like a serpent, wrapping around alien fortresses on the coasts. When the waves fell, they didn't retreat, they formed walls, standing tides that moved as one. The Vaktari attempted to flee, but the planet no longer obeyed their physics. Magnetic fields twisted navigation systems, turning their own ships into compasses pointing toward their doom. Spaceports erupted from within as vines of molten metal pierced their hulls. For the first time, the invaders felt something like fear. In orbit, the Dominion Council demanded an explanation. None came. Their instruments detected a surge of planetary energy beyond classification, no radiation, no fusion, no known element. Just raw, living power. They labeled it Biosource Anomaly 9. Within hours, every ship within the Earth's orbit was either crippled or consumed. On the surface, the survivors emerged from the cavern into a world reborn. They stood on soil that glowed faintly underfoot, breathing air that hummed with unseen voices. The planet's fury was not chaotic, it was deliberate. It targeted the invaders with precision, sparing the remnants of humanity. Era was gone, but her presence lingered in every gust of wind, every ripple of water. The survivors could feel her watching through the planet itself. One of them whispered, "Is she?" The ground trembled gently in response. They understood. She was everywhere. As the Vaktari fleets crumbled, the Earth's surface continued to transform. Deserts bloomed into jungles overnight. Glacier cracked open to reveal new rivers, glowing from within. Life was no longer following biology, it was rewriting it. Everything was connected, from stone to seed to skin. The Dominion tried one last act of defiance. They unleashed their planetary weapon, a fusion spear capable of splitting moons. It struck the atmosphere and vanished. The sky rippled, then glowed emerald. A moment later, the weapon reappeared, redirected, descending straight into the Dominion's own flagship. The explosion was visible from every surviving satellite. The war ended in silence. But silence didn't mean peace. The survivors realized what they were witnessing wasn't merely vengeance, it was awakening. Earth was no longer a planet to inhabit, it had become something aware, something choosing. The ground pulsed like a heartbeat, and they felt it beneath their skin. The air itself seemed to breathe. Era's final whisper reached them through the wind, "You called me home. Now you must become part of me." The survivors knelt as the light spread, and for the first time since the war began, they felt no fear. They were no longer separate from their world. They were inside its heartbeat. And the world, long silent, was alive again, furious, beautiful, and whole. The skies burned green. The Dominion's fleets, once symbols of invincible power, now drifted like dead husks over a planet that refused to die. Their transmissions collapsed into chaos, static, screams, fragments of language drowned in interference. They had tried to silence a world, but the world had learned to speak through storm and stone. Earth no longer fought with weapons. She fought with intent. Her fury spread in perfect rhythm, each disaster a heartbeat. The Vaktari sent reinforcements, armadas that darkened the stars. They entered the system expecting resistance, but what they found was an ecosystem at war. The magnetosphere pulsed like a living organism, bending gravitational currents. Their ships strained to stabilize orbit, only to be pulled down by invisible tides. In the high atmosphere, the auroras thickened until they formed currents of pure plasma. The Dominion ships fired blindly into them, but the beams scattered like rain on steel. A voice followed through their comms, layered and human yet vast. "You have consumed enough." It wasn't a threat. It was a sentence. From orbit, they saw the transformation. Continents shimmered with impossible color. Forests glowed with liquid light, each tree a conduit for the planet's will. Mountains walked, slow, grinding titans of stone rising from the crust, their shapes bending to the rhythm of seismic energy. Oceans glimmered with luminous organisms, rising in towers of liquid that defied gravity. Life itself had become the weapon. In the ruins of the old world, the last humans felt the change in their blood. The energy that radiated from the planet began to alter them, skin turning faintly luminescent, veins glowing with soft green light. They didn't resist. They understood. They were no longer separate from the Earth's awakening, they were its extensions, her will given human shape. They called themselves symbionts, but names hardly mattered now. They were no longer soldiers. They were parts of something far greater. When the next wave of Vuktari descended, the symbionts rose to meet them. They didn't use guns or armor. The ground itself armed them. Roots coiled into spears, air condensed into blades of sound, rivers twisted into living whips of water. Where their feet touched soil, it responded, shaping itself to defend them. Each movement was mirrored by the world around them, a seamless dance between human and planet. The invaders fought with fury, deploying energy weapons and atmospheric detonators. Yet every blast they unleashed was absorbed into the earth, redirected, reshaped. Volcanoes erupted not from chaos, but from precision. Ash clouds moved like hunters, choking only the enemy. Hurricanes formed and struck their fleets with the accuracy of guided missiles. The planet's defense was alive and aware. For every alien weapon that fell, a new kind of life emerged, creatures that had never existed in any age. Wolves made of obsidian, their eyes burning with lightning. Birds of flame that ignited the sky as they flew. Trees that uprooted themselves to crush enemy tanks, their roots glowing like veins of lava. Each creation was both beautiful and terrifying, nature no longer passive, but predatory. The Dominion's commanders panicked. They ordered full-scale retreat, but it was already too late. The atmosphere had turned against them. Their ships couldn't escape orbit, the gravity wells had changed, alive and shifting. In desperation, they tried to contact their main fleet beyond the system. The transmission went out, but what came back was not a response. It was laughter, low, resonant, unmistakably human. The signal spread through their networks, carried by their own communication channels. Code began to rewrite itself, corrupted by something unseen. The Earth's consciousness was moving through their systems, consuming them as it had consumed their bodies. Screens flickered, data screamed, engines froze. The invaders realized that their greatest strength, their technology, had become the bridge for their own destruction. Down below, the symbionts gathered on the plains of what was once South America, watching the sky turn white with burning wrecks. They didn't cheer. There was no triumph in vengeance, only inevitability. Era's voice, now part of the planet, whispered through their minds, "They thought we were weak because we cared." The earth trembled as if agreeing. Mountains split open, releasing veins of molten emerald light that cascaded across the land like rivers of energy. Every element was alive, the air humming, the soil breathing, the oceans roaring like voices. The planet had become one vast consciousness, unified and unstoppable. In orbit, the Dominion's flagship tried to fire one last weapon, a gravitational imploder designed to crush worlds. The moment it charged, the magnetic field twisted, folding their weapon inward. The implosion consumed the ship in a bloom of white light. When it faded, only fragments remained, fragments that began to drift downward, glowing faintly green as they burned in the atmosphere. Humanity's voice returned then, spoken through Era's memory. "We are the storm you made." Her tone was not cruel. It was final. The symbionts raised their hands, and lightning followed. The sky itself became a weapon, a web of power that reached from horizon to horizon. The last of the Vuktari vanished in the brilliance. When silence fell again, the survivors looked around at the transformed world. It was no longer the Earth they had known. It pulsed with energy, alive in every grain of sand, every drop of rain. Yet, amidst the chaos, there was harmony. The planet wasn't destroying itself, it was evolving. The symbionts stood as witnesses to the rebirth of their home. Their hearts beat in sync with the rumble beneath their feet. They could feel the Earth's satisfaction, not of vengeance fulfilled, but of balance restored. Above them, the clouds parted, revealing stars untouched by war. For the first time in generations, they saw the night sky, vast, silent, forgiving. The world was whole again, but changed forever. One of the symbionts whispered, "We didn't save her." Another replied, "She saved herself." The ground shivered softly, as if in agreement. Far beyond the atmosphere, the last fragments of the Dominion fleet drifted into darkness. Their distress beacons pulsed once, then faded. The signal carried through the void for light years, a warning to every world that consumed without respect. And somewhere deep in that silence, the echo of Era's voice followed, "We endure." The universe had witnessed a miracle cloaked in wrath. Humanity, through Earth's fury, had proven the truth no empire could erase, that compassion, even when broken, was stronger than conquest. They destroyed our world, but in doing so, they awakened something greater than fear. They taught a living planet how to fight. And Earth had learned well. The war was over, but victory felt like silence. The fires had died, and the air was thick with renewal. The survivors stood among the ruins of what had been their world, surrounded by forests that pulsed within a light. They were not the same people who had watched the sky burn. The energy of the planet coursed through them now, slow and steady, as if every heartbeat answered a deeper rhythm beneath the ground. Humanity had not survived the war, it had transformed. The symbionts no longer needed language to understand one another. Their thoughts flowed like roots through soil, connected by the will of the world they had become part of. They felt the planet's exhaustion, its quiet satisfaction, and the sorrow that still lingered beneath the surface. The Vaktarii were gone, but the wounds they left behind stretched deep. The earth mourned even as she healed, her grief expressed in rain that shimmered gold across the new forests. The survivors moved through this reborn landscape with reverence. Where cities once stood, now grew towers of crystal and stone shaped by unseen hands. Rivers carved new paths, glowing faintly as if carrying memories instead of water. Every breath they took was alive. The earth was still remaking herself, and they were part of her design. Era's voice drifted through the wind again, soft yet vast. It no longer came from one direction, it was everywhere, in the trees, in the waves, in the pulse of the soil. "You are her memory now," it said. "You are what remains of her dream." The symbionts understood the truth. Humanity was gone as it had been, but not lost. The human spirit, its defiance, its compassion, its relentless drive to endure, had become inseparable from the earth's will. Flesh and soil, thought and root, bound into one. They had not reclaimed their planet. They had become it. Above, the skies shimmered with new constellations, living auroras shaped like roots stretching into space. The heart of Gaia, deep within the planet's core, pulsed brighter with each passing day. What began as wrath was now transformation. The planet was preparing for something greater, something beyond survival. The symbionts gathered one final time on the plateau that overlooked what had once been the ocean. Now it was a vast expanse of glowing water, calm and endless. They could feel Era's presence moving among them. Though her body had vanished, her essence remained everywhere. When they spoke her name, the wind responded. She whispered, "The cycle completes itself. The seed has grown." The ground beneath them began to tremble, not with destruction, but with birth. The planet's magnetic field expanded, shimmering in colors no human eye had seen before. The air filled with resonant hums, frequencies of life, communication far beyond speech. The planet was alive in every sense, conscious on a scale the survivors could barely comprehend. They felt her decision long before it became visible. The earth was not content to remain anchored. The heart of Gaia was expanding, reaching toward the stars with invisible roots of energy. Gravity itself bent in response. Mountains lifted fractionally, oceans leaned upward as if drawn by unseen tides. The survivors watched as the impossible began to unfold, their world was preparing to move. The planet's crust shimmered with radiant energy. Deep below, the core ignited into a sphere of brilliant light. Slowly, delicately, the Earth began to detach from her orbit. The moon followed, drawn by invisible threads of connection. To the stars beyond, it would appear as though the planet had vanished in a single pulse of emerald fire. But it was not destruction. It was ascension. The symbionts felt themselves dissolving into that light, their forms breaking apart into motes of energy. There was no pain, only release, the sensation of returning to something vast and welcoming. They were no longer individuals, no longer separate beings of flesh and memory. They were the whisper of leaves, the rush of wind, the warmth of stone. They were home. Through the final joining, Era's voice returned one last time. It was not sorrowful. It was triumphant. They destroyed our world, she said, but they forgot who we are. We are the roots that never die. We are the storm that never ends. We are Earth, and we remember. Her words rippled through the air, carried across continents, echoing through the oceans. The planet's glow intensified until it outshone the sun. Then, with a soundless surge of power, Earth broke free. From the void, she drifted like a living star, a sphere of green fire trailing threads of light. Each thread carried fragments of life, spores of future worlds waiting to be born. Where once there had been a dying planet, now there was a traveler, a seed of consciousness carrying the legacy of humanity through the galaxy. Behind her, nothing remained of the old orbit but stardust and memory. Ahead, infinite darkness, and the promise of new suns. The heart of Gaia pulsed steadily, echoing the rhythm of billions of souls that had once called her home. Humanity had found immortality not through machines or empires, but through unity with the very thing that had birthed them. Somewhere, light years away, alien senses detected a moving anomaly, a celestial body alive and radiating unmeasurable energy. The Dominion's surviving outposts stared in silence as their instruments confirmed the impossible. Their lost conquest was returning, transformed and awake. Fears spread across their ranks, but there would be no invasion this time. The planet they had once consumed was now beyond their reach. Within the drifting glow, Era's voice faded into calm. "We endure," she whispered, her words blending with the hum of creation. "And through us, all worlds will learn." The stars reflected her passage, each one flickering brighter as if acknowledging what she had become. The memory of Earth would never die. It would travel forever, not as a tomb of humanity, but as a living testament to the truth that had always defined them, the will to rise again. They destroyed our world. But we were never only flesh. We were the soil, the breath, the endless pulse beneath the sky. And in the heart of the cosmos, the planet that once wept now sang. Earth struck back with fury. And in her fury, she was reborn.